I thought since tomorrow NU gets absolutely blasted by tier shifts, that it'd be really cool to look back at every single ban that we have had in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet and just give a little recap as to why the Pokemon got banned and where we are now with the tier as a result. If you enjoy this kind of metagame talk content, make sure to subscribe for more of it, along with more PS Lives we upload daily around here. And hey, leave a like, comment down below. All this to get us to the end of your goal of 10k subs. I appreciate all the help that y'all can give. So, of course, if you want to talk about what our current council is, I'm a TL. Good friend Eternally is my co-TL, and we have all these lovely people that are on our council. I'm sure you've seen, of course, I've used a lot of teams from Tug. I've used teams from Mary's, yes. Danny, I'm sure I have too. Slice, I'm sure I have. Luck, GXC, I don't know, but you know what? They build great teams too. And we could see Tog, you joined as TL right to start this generation. Finch stepped down as TL earlier in the generation. Very sad, but you know what? That man does so much work on the website. He deserved it. So, we actually hadn't been updating this at the start of the gen, so we have a whole bunch of posts about how we were doing tiering. And remember, with Smogon, we actually used to have it, so when a tier was in alpha, no quick bans happened. You just had like a month of chaos, where the tier was just supposed to form, you used whatever was good, all of the good mons would stay in that tier, hopefully, and then you could immediately ban out what was the most obscene. And we actually did away with that, so even though NU was made in February for this gen, we have bans within February, and our first slate ended up getting rid of Pom Pom Oricorio, Goodra, and Venomoth. Now, Oricorio, Pom Pom, and you see Oricorio Sinsu down here, those will not shock you. Oricorio, Pom Pom, with Revelation Dance changing based on Terra type, Quiver Dance to make it obscene offensively, and it already being an incredible mon pre-Terra, like Electric Flying. That's Zapdos, and baby Zapdos! This mon had everything that it needed. If you were to try and figure out defensive checks to it, you had like Chansey, which, unless you ran into Taunt Oricorio, could kind of trade with it. But otherwise, it wasn't gonna beat it long term. You know, you have limited soft bolts, and your Seismic Toss, if you're facing a bulky Oricorio, it's not doing enough. And otherwise, you had, you know, it's gonna be other electric types. Electros was honestly a pretty decent answer, admittedly. Like, at Assault Vest sets with like Acid Spray or Dragon Tail, those could help. And something like Goodra could kind of stave it off a little bit, but it also isn't a particularly great long-term answer. A lot of other mons were just going to get potentially messed up by your Terra types. Terra Grass was pretty good on some of those defog sets that you saw as well, to just catch Sandaconda off guard. And in generally, you saw Terra Ground on Oricorio, because offensively, Lycanroc was probably the best revenge killer. And, well, if I turn into a ground type, guess what doesn't revenge kill me anymore? Lycanroc. And of course, Goodra got banned, because really it's just a matter of stats. This might be the worst pseudo-legendary. That does not mean that it is still on the power level of NU. That is a 600 BST Pokemon. That's really high. And at the time, back in February, Steel types? Yeah, we had Copper Raja. Nothing else. And Goodra, of course, even has coverage still, but you at least want to be able to dissuade Draco Meteor usage, and that was really hard. Because unless you wanted to burn your Terra, you did not have a way to dissuade it. Compare it to, like, say, Mesprit, another really strong wall breaker right now, which you could say it also forces the use of Terra. Not nearly as well! At least with Mesprit's strongest move, you have Dark types that can come in and be completely immune and force Mesprit to lose a whole bunch of momentum if it's choice locked. Goodra didn't have that. And you could say, oh, what about fairy types? Yeah, we didn't have any. We haven't really had any all gen. And so, it, you know, there wasn't anything to be immune to it, so the next best thing would at least be a good resistance. And we had one. And it got fire blasted and died. So that wasn't very good. And you had some, like, bulky destroyer sets. You had, like, Acid Spray Substitute. So even something like Chansey could get kind of cheesed by that. Also, it was just really good at saving you against maybe anything with Toxic if it wanted to try and, say like a Quillfish, if it's just trying to get a quick Toxic off on you. Yeah, that wasn't happening anymore. It just made it even harder for you to get chipped down. And I mean, you want to talk about Mons that force switches? Well, Goodra obviously was really good at that. Having sub means you can very, very safely keep wall breaking. So it's just a very powerful tool. And in Venomoth, I'm here to tell you right now, the only consistent Venomoth answer was Goodra if you had one of your own. And even then, it was kind of vulnerable. Because you had to be Assault Vest to check a Venomoth after it Quiver Danced. And yeah, that works okay in theory, but the problem is you don't have recovery, of course. So you better be paired with Vaporeon. At the time, of course, we had Vapo in the tier. And that's it's prone to be in Momentum Dawn. Wish Pass has not been very consistent in lower tiers, or at least in Inu this generation. And so, you want to waste turns to give some of these really dynamic setup sweepers free leverage to start boosting? Yeah, have fun. And of course, with Tinted Lens on Venomoth as well, terastallizing into a Steel type doesn't actually do much. You know, unless you were weak to the move originally, you're still taking just as much damage from Bug Buzz. So what Venomoth would do is run Terra Bug, and it would just Bug Buzz your team 6 times after it got the right amount of boosts. And again, the same thing plays with Venomoth that it did with Ori. You had Chansey, and like Thunderwave Chansey was a fine means of trying to kinda limit it, sorta kinda, but it's just not consistent. So that was our first ban slate. And in March, Satitan was a drop. I believe we also had a Abomasnow at the same time drop. And naturally, Snow teams immediately became relevant, because Satitan has Slush Rush. Snow got the boost this gen to where Ice types have a defense raise under the weather. So Satitan was looking like an incredible threat, and this was also before Aurora Veil had the nerf through a Light Clay ban, unless I'm misremembering timelines. But regardless, Aurora Veil was getting seen. And yeah, the tier at the time, and even the tier now, there was nothing stopping Satitan after a belly drum. You have very limited amounts of Pokemon that are even gonna tank Ice Shard, let alone its other very, very powerful attacks that are, you know, because of Slush Rush, actually justifiably used. You don't have to be like, say maybe a Belly Drum Hariyama spamming Bullet Punch. So Titan had the advantage of being so fast in addition to having the priority that if you had a Pokemon in front of you that you needed to use a stronger move versus, say maybe like there was something that was going to Terra Steel in front of you, you actually had the leeway to use, you know, Icicle Crash or Earthquake versus it, whichever was going to do damage. You know, if you're talking like an Electros with Terra Steel, of course you can't Earthquake that. So maybe you go for the Icicle Crash versus the Eel, because you don't have to Ice Shard it since you're going to be faster anyway. This one was very, very easily banned. I don't think anyone voted no ban. And then Oricorio Sensu, because Ghost Flying, although not as good defensively, the thing with this typing was it was even more potent offensively for a couple reasons. One of them being that Substitute on Oricorio Sensu was very, very, very easily done. Unlike some of these other Oricorios that have run Substitute before, the Blissies and Chanseys of the world were always able to kind of sit in front of them and give them issues because unless they were Terra Ghost, you had Seismic Toss, and you just broke the sub very consistently. It did not matter, you were always breaking the sub, and the move kind of became not useless, but the purpose was negated. But with Oricorio Sensu, that's not a problem. You're a Ghost type naturally, so you could still have a different Terra type like Fairy or Fighting, and then on top of being able to sub up on those mons, you've got your Terra Fairy, so when your opponent goes out to say like an Umbreon, or I don't believe, we didn't have it at the time, but like a Bombardier, or a Zoroark. Well, now I have a super effective Revelation Dance for you, and I'm also, not immune, but resistant to your Sucker Punch, if you have it. So, yeah, I mean, it was another good example of how the Oricorios were able to consistently pick and choose what they wanted their answers to be, oftentimes just based on their Terra type, because of the very unique interaction that Revelation Dance has with it. And then, this is a mon that was obviously more limited in terms of its overall role. We didn't really see defog sets on it like we did with Pom Pom, just because Sensu, you know, worse defensively, based on typing, Ghost is pretty bad. It has some immunities, but at the time we had so many fast dark types, a lot of the mons you might switch a ghost type into had dark type coverage, Passimian being the relevant one, but even Metacham, if you want to talk about like it having Ice Punch or just a secondary stab move, Paldean Tauros commonly, running Terrablast Electric, it just wasn't as well made, I guess, to suit that kind of role. And so, around this time as well, Fire Oricorio picking up. Surely we won't ban another one, right? And yeah, a month passes. We think the tier is in a fine spot for the time. Nothing really striking us as being very OP. Also, I believe through the rest of March, we still retain Copper and then, of course, Vaporeon's around for a good bit longer, too. So that's useful context for why maybe some threats weren't as broken. And then April came, and the two big drops were Florges and Barraskewda. And Barraskewda's, maybe pretty surprisingly, was banned first. Despite us having like Vaporeon, Toxicroak, even Cacturne by this point was starting to catch on. Appleton wasn't really hard meta, same with Lurantis, but they were beginning to get a little attention as well. But we still banned Barraskewda. Why? Well, Jolteon was already known for being pretty good at the time. And getting another Mon that was even faster than Jolteon without a Scarf, while being able to run, if I'm remembering speed tiers correctly, an attack boosting nature was viewed as a little bit dire, completely morphing the revenge killing game entirely. And even though you had these not even resistances, immunities to the super strong liquidations of Barraskewda, well, when I can Terra Fighting and CC the ever-living hell out of your Vaporeon or Lurantis, that doesn't matter too much anymore, now does it? Or I could Terra Psychic and go for Psychic Fangs versus you. Doesn't really matter anymore when you've got some of these Pokemon. The raid teams were also actually really, really potent. We also had Floatzel at the time. I remember that too now. Floatzel dropped with it, so you could run like Floatzel plus Barraskewda rain and just kind of run down the entire tier. So yeah, very easy ban. And then Florges, because after we had our ban of Barraskewda, we put out a survey. Florges was pretty close internally as well on the vote, if I'm remembering right, because we had some worries about like, okay, well, yes, naturally we love Florges as an idea to keep around in a tier because defensively it'd be a great fairy type. The issue is Florges actually pretty strong. It's reasonably fast too. Spec sets might be actually kind of broken. Maybe even offensive Calm Mind. So these were some ideas floating in with Council that we wanted to, survey as a result. Be like, alright, is Florges actually a little broken? Because we also started having the community speak up and be like, Florges might need to be banned as well. So we survey. Florges got like a 4.3 average score or something on the survey, which that's really high on a scale of 1 to 10. And because when a Mon gets that strong of support for tiering action, there's not really much reason to waste time with a suspect test, because the results are going to be known anyway. And as you see too, with the date it was banned, imagine we ran a suspect test, and then the meta is immediately different 2 days after the conclusion. We thought that was a great waste of time, and so we just went off the survey results and said, yep, Florges, you can be banned. It was a very easy decision for us to make. And then we had a bit of a down period during May. Apparently Indeedee we quick banned immediately. I remember this actually. We got Indeedee dropping in May, and we all just kind of agreed, yeah, this Mon is not balanced for Inu, so we're gonna quick ban it, but resuspect it, because there was a little bit of hope within Council of like, well, it got move pool nerfs, and this gen, Indeedee female really isn't that good, so, maybe it's balanceable, it's really frail, the speed tier it sits at isn't the most convenient. The big things that kept it, of course, from being unbanned, again, move pool nerfs don't actually affect it in this gen. With how Inu doesn't have good defensive steals, it doesn't matter it lost Mystical Fire. Because, okay, what am I hitting anyway? Please, inform me. I'd love to hear what I need Mystical Fire for. Assault Vest Electros? I will Psyshock you as you switch in. You will take, like, 70. And please, go for Terra and still get KO'd. Like, there weren't checks that were defensive. Because basically, really, it's just Psyshock blew everything up. And then, if you want to think about offensively, Terra Fairy ended up covering a lot of stuff. Like a Passimian if it wants to CC you, or even just go for knockoff, because, well, your bulk's so bad, Knock can actually revenge kill you pretty well. Yeah, I've got Terra Fairy now, and then I Dazzling Gleam you, and you're gone. Same with, like, Zoroark. I can just turn into a Fairy type. Umbreon, you think Umbreon wants to check me? Terra Fairy boosted Dazzling Gleam. Hello, you are going bye-bye. Same with something like Bombardier. Now, interestingly enough, we did have Hisuian Quillfish release a little over a week later, which probably would have been a decent check, all things considered, but I think as well you would just seen it get tricked and crippled for the rest of the game and become pretty worthless. I do see, if NU gets more steel types in our tier shift tomorrow, and this is being recorded, by the way, 2.5 weeks in advance, so it's weird to say tomorrow, but if we get more steel types tomorrow, I think there's a good shot we all decide on unbanning it. I've mentioned it before, we are going to have a vote on what we unban from NUBL, because there's just no point in freeing everything when some stuff will be OP. Then we had on Arceus Resign. I didn't mention it at the time, because Lamau, get owned, get trolled. He's a good friend, it's okay. And then Danny and CS were brought on, two very good friends, very good tour players. I'm really happy to have them around. Sadly, Renchon stepped down, though. But look, more Pokemon news, isn't that exciting? We didn't actually take any action throughout June, which is very insane. Though, when I think back to what we had talked about in June, it makes sense. There was not really anything getting talked about as OP at the time. Like, the Dunsparce actually... Okay, I should rephrase that. The Dunsparce started getting some ripples. But around the time that we would have suspected it, it was the start of NUPL, and it took us a couple weeks to start seeing, okay, well, Dodon's looking a little oppressive, maybe we need to take action, and then Council wasn't really too sold at the time, and we were gonna, once we were talking about it, it was getting close to tier shift, so we wanted to see, because we were gonna have a pretty big tier shift. Remember, Pokemon Home came out in late May, meaning OU was going to drop Pokemon to every single tier, and we didn't know what NU was going to get. So it would have been kind of pointless to start holding a, suspect test in mid to late June when the tier's then going to get notable shifts. So, July hits, and you see Tornadus and Frosmoth as our first two bans. Frosmoth was in NU at the very beginning of the gen, and it was really broken, at least in my opinion at the time. The main limit to it was that you still really needed Terra. Without Terra, Copperajah was sitting in your face, and it was taking you out. Potentially as well, Chansey was doing the same, because without... The difference between Frosmoth and, say, Oricorio as a Quiver Dancer is, of course, recovery. You have to use Giga Drain to get health back, and you just didn't recover enough health to beat Chansey consistently. So, the way they adapted was they started running Terra Ghost with Substitute, and not only did this help versus Chansey, because it can't break your subs anymore with Seismic, this helped versus the Choice Scarf fighting types too, so Metacham and Passimian. A lot of the time, they're going to try and CC you to revenge kill you, but if you're Terra Ghost, you just sub on the CC, and then you get 2 boosts for free. And so, at that point, unless your opponent's got like a Sucker Punch, Toxicroak or Zoroark, it was a little jover. Fast forward to July, the big benefit to it, there were 2. One, we had Abomasnow. Abomasnow had left the tier in like May, and then it came back in July. And Abomasnow, of course, does the same stuff for Frosmoth that it does for Cetitan. Give that big defense boost. Frosmoth already has Ice Scales to boost its special defense, as well as Quiver. The Mon was really hard to KO, and you could also get Aurora Veil to supplement that as well. And we don't have Copperajah anymore. And Electros, by this point, was actually notably worse. And didn't really see the kind of usage that it, was getting 2 months ago. Yeah, this was a very easy ban. And Tornadus got banned as well, which was frankly not the easiest ban in my view, because in my experience at least with it, Torn wasn't pulling its weight very well, and the meta had been pretty heavily centralized around like Jolteon, and Rotom you still saw getting pretty good use. So there were two just easy revenge killers. The main issue that we ended up running into is just Torn so good offensively. Specs kind of blowing up everything, pivot sets being just annoying as hell to play around. Thankfully they didn't still have knockoff, but it didn't really change the fact that they were hard to maneuver around, because they're so fast, and they're still really strong. And the coverage is so nice as well. Really, the only thing that was taking hits from you comfortably was something like Blissey, and we'll just U-turn on it, and then you get a million momentums. Not just one momentum, a million. It's that versatility, you know, you could kind of tell what I'm going for there. Definitely playing a part too. You had specs, you had just pivot set with like U-turn, Hurricane, etc. You even could run like Rain Dance Hurricane. Didn't even have to be on a rain team. Just Tornadus is like its own rain setting attacker. If you play PU, you've probably seen Golduck do that. And Tornadus was able to somewhat effectively as well. Nasty Plot was a good set. Even bulk up stuff was pretty good with Prankster or Defiant. You know, you could even get the fast bulk up. Or you could go, hey, I want to punish any defogger. Lurantis, I'm looking at you. And then make your life hell with my very strong acrobatics. I even saw some Tornaduses run like Crunch, specifically to style on Rotom. So, yeah. And next up, we see the Hoopla quick ban about a week later. Hoopa's a pretty just simple case of a combination of set versatility and power. A lot of y'all would probably remember Hoopa running like choice item. Scarf saw a lot of use because Hoopa's special attack stat is 150 base, which is really high. I mean, you're talking like Mewtwo levels there. But of course, with its poor speed stat, you end up liking Scarf because it, you know, you're outrunning everything not named Jolteon at that point. But, you know, Scarf's still kind of tame when you think about it. There was still a good amount of dark types that could pivot around the stab moves at least. And if Hoopa isn't using its stab attacks, it's a lot easier to deal with, you know? I'd rather Hoopa going for like Thunderbolt as I go to my Quillfish, Hisuian of course, than it go for like anything else. What ended up breaking it though, for most of us in Council, was when it started running like sub 3 attacks, and Assault Vest even, because Assault Vest kind of just made a lot of mons no longer KO you, even if they're using a 4 times effective ghost move, or even just starting to run knockoff on Hoopa. That was also very effective because you crippled checks like Quillfish, Umbreon, Bombardier. Getting rid of their item made them so much easier to break because, you know, Umbreon no longer was getting passive recovery, Bombardier took damage from Stealth Rock, and Quillfish without an Eviolite is just not very bulky. Next up, big Grimmsnarl. Grimmsnarl getting suspect tested and banned. This is pretty recent, so I'm sure most of you remember it. Bulk up Grimmsnarl, mandating like every team also bring a Coil Electros to mirror match it, or that you just played so aggressively that it couldn't bulk up. The issue with the aggressive play, of course, was this. If you run into Grimmsnarl, it can always sub up before you attack it. Prankster sub was just so much better, and the best comp will always be to something like Dunsparce, which is also a very punishing bulky setup sweeper. The difference, of course, being something like a Dunsparce, it's slow and there's not a way to circumvent that really. You know, you have paralysis support coming in, but a Dunsparce is gonna have to worry about getting tricked to Choice Scarf by a Rotom. Grimmsnarl didn't have to. You could always scout it out, see if the Rotom's going for a trick, or if it's gonna Will-O-Wisp you, or Volt Switch, or whatever it wants to do. You had all the initiative. And having Prankster played into the bulk up stuff too, because one, you boosted faster, but also if I need to get like a quick bulk up off somewhere, just like as a means of tanking a hit better, I can do that. And this doesn't even talk about like all the other sets, like Bandit being incredibly strong, the pivot set just being one of the best progress makers we've seen in Inu in a while, and it actually being a fast pivot too, because you got that Prankster parting shot, which is really cool to have. And yeah, everyone pretty much unanimously said, get this bozo out of here. And then Finch steps down from Inu Council, still around in the community though, so happy to have him. We brought in Mr. GXC, very well-renowned player, great at OU, great at Inu, really great at every tier. And now, the last 4 Pokemon. Everything that happened this month. Now, it feels weird to take pretty sizable tiering action in the last month of a metagame before it gets flipped on its head. But we have tournaments going on. So you kind of got to do what you got to do to preserve them, right? So we had our slate at the start of the month that had 5 Pokemon. Oricorio, Zoroark, Jolteon, Dunsparce, Mesprit. And in that slate, Ori, Zoro, and Jolt all got quick banned. Another Oricorio, of course, because turns out the same logic that applied to the previous 2 applies to this one. It's way too versatile. The Taunt Terra Fairy sets were what really pushed it over the edge, though, because you just completely dismantled stall like any bulky mon. Literally any of your bulky checks fell flat on their face when you Terra Fairy'd on them, outside of like Muck. And Muck hasn't really even been like super dominant in a while. It's just still kind of renowned as, yeah, we accept that it's a pretty good option, but it's not as like a metagame staple anymore. And even just the difference between offensive and defensive Oricorio was pretty relevant too. The bulkier sets taking random hits better than they should, while the offensive sets kind of just two-shotting things like Hisui and Quillfish with Hurricane after a boost. Not fun. Not funny. Didn't laugh. And at Zoroark, before it rose to RU in, I think, June, it was already getting a lot of talk for being potentially problematic in Inyu. You know, combination of so many different sets that it could run. Specs, Scarf, Swords Dance, Nasty Plot you had, Mixed you had, all varying degrees of counterplay to them. The biggest thing, though, in my view at least, was Specs being kind of hard to switch into, as well as Illusion. I said it then, I'll say it now. The one thing that made me think Zoroark might be too good is the power level decrease. Because if you make a misprediction versus Zoroark, that Illusion Mind game being so much more profound now because our power level's lower, you're getting punished more, because I'm not switching into something as bulky as a Kaparaja, I'm switching into like a Berserker. It's not the best comparison, but that's like the general idea. Our defensive Pokemon are worse now, so when I'm mid-grounding, I'm taking more damage this gen than I would last gen. And in Jolteon, peaking probably sometime in July is when people really embrace Jolteon as one of the best, like, 3 Pokemon in the format. And it also finally getting banned, because, yeah, turns out, if you need to Terra with a Pokemon, it doesn't really matter that much when Terraing makes you this obscene. Terra Blast Ice, literally being 2 times as strong as Hidden Power Ice, is insane to me. Sandaconda has a high chance of being O-code by a Terra Blast Ice. It can avoid a 2-hit KO from Hidden Power Ice. Again, there's levels to this. It's an insane buff to Jolt. And Calm Mind, of course, just adding to it, because Jolteon's not just some pivoter this gen. It's not just, you know, a Specs wall breaker, even though both of those ideas still work really well for it. It does everything. It does a little bit of everything. It sweeps, it wall breaks, it revenge kills. It just pivots around to support its team. And in vibe checking literally the entire format by being so much faster than everything else, and only really being revenge killed consistently by, say, Choice Scarf, Hisui, and Sneasel. Yeah, kind of makes it OP. And then we had one more vote on Dunsparce, because it had a 4 on the community survey, with a couple outlier votes I labeled them, that were 1 and 2. I'm gonna keep it a stack. If you voted 1 or 2 on Dunsparce, I think you're just very far off compared to everyone else. Not that you can't have a different experience, it's just when I looked at the votes, I think it was 26 to 28 out of the 38 votes we had on Dunsparce were for a 4 or 5. So it's just, there's a very clear difference in terms of the distribution of votes. We call that a left skew over to that side. I don't think that's actually a good way to use that term, but it works out still for the little bar graph I had, so let me cook, okay? When you took those votes out, the Dunsparce is, even though there were only like 5 of them total, maybe only 4, you went from a 4 on the Dunsparce to like a 4.4. A big difference there. The mode for votes was a 5. You had over I think 20 people voted at a 5. Maybe fewer, but it was a lot. In fact, it's definitely lower. I don't think the vote could have gone all the way down to a 4 on average if it was 5, if it was over half people voting at a 5. But the Dunsparce getting bad for the same reasons that I've talked about before. Coil is just not consistently beatable without you having to really go out of your way in the builder, really go out of your way in the battle. All the while, you may still run into Calm Mind to Dunsparce and get completely destroyed because it has not really any shared checks to Coil. And the final thing for this gen for tiering, for this part of the gen, because NU's not going away, we're getting DLC 1 soon too. Eternally stepping in as my new Eternally stepping in as my new co-TL and Maryberry stepping down. Of course, I'm really hyped to lead with a friend of mine. And I'm still really sad to see Mary go because she was a really good co-TL, so. She's sticking around as counsel, thankfully. But I'm still excited. But I hope you all enjoyed this. I think it's really cool to just look back at the tier. And at the end of the generation even, I'll probably come back and look at everything once again. Which, that could take a while. But I'm excited for tomorrow. As I mentioned, I'm recording this 2.5 weeks in advance. But I will record the video on September 1st on the day of. Because, yeah, I want to make sure that I cover that when it happens. The tier shifts are going to be massive. I think they deserve important attention. So, I hope y'all enjoyed. I will see y'all tomorrow. Let's have some fun. Peace.